Thank you, everyone. It's such a great pleasure for me to take part in this forum to discuss your book, Charlotte. It's a very thought provoking book, Memories of Unbelonging. The scope and the extent of Memories of Unbelonging are what's impressive to me. And I feel utterly privileged to have witnessed how this all began almost 2 decades ago. I'm one of Charlotte's research participants, and most recently, I had the luxury to contribute to the cover of Memories of Unbelonging. Reading the book transported me to the lives of so many individuals who are so different to me, but at the same time, like me, are identified as and also identify as Chinese Indonesians. This is just one of the ways this book is admirable to me. Charlotte manages to zoom into the single pixels of various colors and shades with such care that enables a very sharp rendering of the larger high-resolution picture of the collective memory. I remember, Charlotte, when you interviewed me, I was starting my PhD in art at Armati University in Melbourne. And as part of these interviews, I remember meeting with Charlotte while I was doing a residency in Melbourne's Preston Market. So it was lovely to find that Charlotte's book also starts with an interview in a market. Not with me in Preston Market, but with Alin in Tanah Abang Market. Well, it may be then easy to say that a pattern is suspect here, like Chineseness, markets, But I'd like to zoom back into single pixels here. The underlying interest in my residency at the Preston Market was to understand how the agency of the individuals form and shape collective action. In a way, my areas of inquiry run parallel with those of Charlotte's, though mine is informed by and extend on a different set of theories and concepts. So there are many compelling discussions in Memories of Unbelonging that I'd love to respond to, but in the next 12 minutes or so, I will try to discuss three interrelated points in Memories of Unbelonging, and I will respond to these points through a conceptual framework that I've developed through my artistic research, which is pronouncedly object-based. The first and the basis for all the 3 points I'd like to go through today is the problematics of trauma. Charlotte discusses this on page 131 in Memories of Unbelonging, namely how difficult it is to shift the subjective nature of trauma into the collective, or to represent trauma in a way that can represent the collective in a meaningful way. But I will propose also that it is not entirely impossible to do this, to shift individual subjective trauma to collective relations through a deep and extended work with objects, as I will discuss now. Now, for a bit of a context, I would refer to the concept of the distribution of the sensible, where Jacques Rancière observes that power structures regulate what is visible and audible, thereby shaping what we perceive of reality. Rancière also emphasizes the critical role of aesthetics in politics as it can reconfigure what is seen and heard, and this concept very clearly describes what happens, but not how it happens. Now, as an artist researcher, this how is what I exactly have access to. This is because artist researchers are not merely observing this reconfiguration from the front seat. Instead, they're actually on the stage. They enact this process of reconfiguration. This standpoint provides me with a hands-on, detailed, and granular insight into the unfolding of the processes, which I have been theorizing through several different fieldworks since Charlotte interviewed me in 2008. Working with many mediums and methods taught me that objects have a significant role in this reconfiguration of what are seen and heard, and in Memories of Unbelonging, Charlotte discusses one of my significant moments of discovery on page 146. In the Inside Indonesia article mentioned in this passage, I described how a security guard at the gallery struck a conversation with me and stated that his family has the same documents as what I was drawing on the walls. Of course, I was puzzled at first because to look at it superficially, this security guard wasn't Chinese and therefore would not have the SBKRI or change of name certificate or the like. However, during the conversation, I quickly realized that he was referring to another document that similarly tied his family into precarious power relations with the nation state because his father was an alleged communist. We can describe this process through Hangxie's distribution of the sensible, that I, as an artist, made something hidden visible and speakable, and therefore began impacting our perception of the current reality. But then again, Hangxie's concepts does not describe how this happens. And so I would propose to describe it. Firstly, that both the security guard and I have a boundary object, a common object that allows different stakeholders to work together even without consenting, communicating, or consensus, which is in this case that object that similarly puts the security guard and I in a precarious power relations with the nation state. Secondly, that through a process of anesthesia that triggers an aesthetic reassembling of identity, this boundary object becomes something I call a thing in common. Aesthesia here can be simply described as the opposite of anesthesia, or the numbing of the senses. And anesthesia is the numbing of the senses in that, that anesthesia is something that you usually undergo before a surgery. And the incommonness of thing in common can be described as, or through Jean-Luc Nancy's being in common, which is an infinite process where singularity is kept within plurality. I would be happy to elaborate all this in our discussion later session, if you'd like to know more, of course. My second point of response is on the habitus, or rather Charlotte's treatment of Bourdieu's habitus. Charlotte critically engages with Bourdieu's habitus, developing significantly further on the uses of the concept in prior studies of Chinese Indonesians as a minority ethnic group in Indonesia. Now here, I would like to note the unconscious nature of Bourdieu's habitus. While this concept is not frequently discussed together with Hangxie's distribution of the sensible, there are potential intersections between the two through this aspect of the unconscious. Both concepts deal with the reproduction of social order, and the unconscious can leak out and become accessible, perceptible, and interpretable through sensory experiences. I discuss this elsewhere as affective thinking, and I argue that it is most approachable through Rosi Braidotti's notion of writing by heart, as she describes Deleuze's 2-volume treatment of cinema written from memory without watching the films again. In my precondition of affective thinking, however, my own memory was one step forcefully removed. If affect was a spectrum of colors, affective thinking meant discerning the nuances of wavelengths reflected by the surface of an object that is not absent but remains as a ghost. And at this point, I'd like to summon Jeffrey Alexander's theories, but slightly different from the way Charlotte has summoned them. I would summon Jeffrey Alexander's social performance within his framework of cultural pragmatics. Within the spirits of Alexander, together with the coupling of Bourdieu and Rancière, I would further argue that, again, objects are a potent in fomenting what Alexander, after Dilthey, discusses as the hermeneutical circle, where people also come with their unconscious, which can leak through their meaning searching, while they're trying to glean a script upon which the performance must have been based. Especially when aesthetic objects are staged in public places and extended with social performance, we will be able to see how aesthetic objects are binders of imagination and emotions. This is imagination in Benedict Anderson's sense of imagined community, and emotions in Sarah Ahmed's sense of objects being sticky. And this would especially be present when these aesthetic objects transform from being boundary objects into becoming things in common, reassembling the identities around them, while their identity shifts. Perhaps this is what Brenda Farnell discusses, as Charlotte cited as well, as dialogic signifying acts. But I would also like to summon the spirits of Latour to remind ourselves that objects are actors too. Again, I will be happy to elaborate more on this in our discussion session. And my third point of response is stimulated by Charlotte's remark at the end of Memories of Unbelonging. This has to do with her yet to be discussed but very materially present unbelonging. I can't help wondering if Charlotte has deliberately, carefully navigated around unbelonging to shape it as a negative space, a space that's created while defining the others, in her critical engagement with the fixity in Bourdieu's habitus. After all, Charlotte did finish her book with a call for scholars to keep an open mind and be prepared to discover post-ethnic and post-national Chinese identities. But I'd like to discuss unbelonging in relation to critical cosmopolitanism within the framework of things in common, in which the boundary-like origin of things in common becomes an interface. In the process of meaning searching, there is always a kind of cultural translation that happens through things in common. For Ihab Hassan, this search points to self-dispossession, a deliberate emptying of Bourdieu's disposition, if you will, that releases us from blood and belonging. Elsewhere, I discuss this as the loss of a cultural base through the criminalization of my supposedly diasporic Chinese culture under Suharto's Indonesia. In this sort of kenosis, albeit a forced one, there is a willingness to let go, adapt, and subvert the emptying of the self as a resistance. In this subversion, missing the so-called root culture does not mean I cannot speak. On the contrary, it means that my speaking, subjective and affective, is unlabeled and unbounded. And this is also where subjective trauma of individuals with agency has the potential to become collective actions. Again, I will be happy to elaborate in the discussion afterwards. But when I talked about trauma, I sort of left post-memory as an epilogue. The reason for this is that I'm not sure how to think about it yet. As the Chinese-Indonesian memory is still in building, there is no resolution. Things are still happening now, even when legally is the discrimination is abolished. but socially it still happens. Um, I was thinking of the post memory in terms of the German guilt, for example, which is, like it's resolved, it's strengthened with memorialization as well, and so it is resolved and definite, and so the German guilt, I think, is post memory. And thinking about that, also Japanese guilt perhaps less widespread than the German guilt, but also resolved, and like they definitely lost, and that's it. Like there is no um, dispute, there is no ongoing contestation, and I guess. Maybe I need to read more, but that is post memory for me, and I'm not sure whether the memory of Chinese Indonesians that are still being experienced now, and it's still being developed and built up now is actually post memory, and I would be happy to discuss that as well. Of course, thank you.